Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast. On the podcast, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. It is official. Spring football is over for Ohio State, and with the conclusion of this part of the football calendar, the Buckeyes are pretty much done with the on-campus visits, at least for the majority of kids around the country, and they finished that part of things off with a bang this weekend, Andrew, starting with two pretty big commitments. First of them, Nate Roberts, four-star tight end from Washington, Oklahoma, a player who has been circled at the top of the board for Keenan Bailey and the Buckeyes for well over a year. We talked about him a lot last week and the risk that Keenan Bailey was running by putting all of his eggs into that basket. And fortunately for the Buckeyes, it paid off. And it did at the right time because, as we saw last Monday, Luka Gilbert, the Lakota West tight end, committed to Miami. On Saturday, 10 hours after Nate Roberts commits to Ohio State, Brock Schott committed to Miami. So the efforts paid off. And with Nate Roberts, you get a top 5 consensus tight end across the country, a guy that Ohio State staff members have compared to me to be like what Cade Stover would have been if he had played tight end his whole life. So you get a really good player. And more importantly than that, you get the first win for Keenan Bailey, who a lot of people, I think, question, is this effort really worthwhile when you have good players closer to home? And it paid off.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can add the number one player on your board, that's never a bad thing. We've talked about it several times now. It was kind of a risky way they were handling things, putting all the eggs in that basket, or so many of the eggs in that basket. His timeline seemed to change around a little bit. We had kind of heard some rumblings it was coming, and then I think, as you mentioned last time we talked, was probably going to maybe not happen until after the Oklahoma spring game visit. But yeah, this weekend brought a nice bit of news to Keenan Bailey, and now I guess I think correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's looking like a one-man class now when we kind of thought it could be two. But either way, that's a huge addition for Ohio State for the 2025 class.
Right. I mean, there has been discussion for months about they would take a two-man class if it had been Nate Roberts and Brock Schott. Knowing that Brock Schott is now off the board, I think they're content with just Nate Roberts. Now, always things are subject to change. If there's more attrition from the current roster, if something happens down the road, you never know. But looks like Nate Roberts is the guy. The thing for him was Keenan Bailey from the start. He said Keenan Bailey recruited him better than anybody else. I've seen photos of Keenan in Oklahoma on trips where he's been out there visiting Roberts in Washington High School, where he's wearing, Nate Roberts' high school, logo. He's done everything he can to make sure that Nate and his family feel comfortable. Talking to some people this weekend, I think one of the things that really pushed things over the top was just realizing that Nate Roberts has a lot of family in the Pickerington area, just outside of Columbus. And he can go away from home and still have family nearby. And that's really what made Ohio State an easy choice for him and his family, because there was some back and forth about, is it worth, or do we want to run this risk of, sending him off to college? And they felt comfortable with it. The family has been getting closer with the Sanchez family. And now as a group, you're going to see them start to really work on other parents, which, as we've talked about before, is so important. So Nate Roberts, commitment number 12 for Ohio State. That was about 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. About an hour and 40 minutes later, so about 20 minutes before kickoff of the Ohio State spring game, I was in Ohio Stadium and I saw Drew Haddad, Cody Haddad's father. And he walks by and he says, "Hey, Cody just committed." I went, "Hey, congratulations. He's going to announce it tonight after dinner." I'm like, "Okay, sounds great. I'll, make sure we have everything ready." Obviously, the game was about to start. And then he sends me a text about 25 minutes later and saying, "Well, the graphics out, so it's official. It's public." I'm like, "Cool." So unfortunately, that didn't go exactly as we thought it was going to go on Saturday, but we had the story ready because this one seemed like a foregone conclusion from the minute that the decommitment from Wisconsin became public. I know that similar to Deshaun Stewart at safety, Ohio State, now with two safeties committed, people are going to look at it and be a little underwhelmed for some reason. He's an in-state kid. I think people always take that for granted, but Cody Haddad is a football player and the type of kid you have to have in your program. You cannot let Ohio's best players go elsewhere. And he is, without question, behind Trey McNutt and Tavian St. Clair and Carter Lowe and maybe Justin Hill. But like, he's one of Ohio's best players without a doubt. And he is a ferocious tackler. He is extremely athletic. It is a player that I think Ohio State fans will be much more excited about 3 years from now than they are now. And that's maybe unfortunate for Cody, but this is a player that Matt Guerrieri circled and dialed in on as soon as he got to town. They're like, their kinship is basically that they're both football nerds and they love just sitting down, talking about the game, breaking down the ins and outs of the game. Family full of football players. His dad played in the NFL. His uncle played in the NFL. His grandfather was an All-American at Penn State before playing in the NFL. Like, this is a very good gene pool that Ohio State is pulling from. And again, he's ranked as a 4-star by Rivals.com, but he only played 4 games as a junior because of a broken arm that sidelined him for the first 2/3 of the season. But like, this is a major win for Ohio State, and now they can focus on Trey McNutt, on Fahim Delane, on Kainoa Winston, on Jonah Williams, who visited this weekend, and look to fill out a 4-man safety class because they have to do that. And now you can maybe take some of the pressure off, and knowing that you have 2 guys in Deshaun Stewart and Cody Haddad that are going to be locked in and ready to go.
Yeah. And like you said, this is a 4-star on Rivals. I know people are going to see some of the other sites and see the 3 little stars next to his name. But as you mentioned, if he had more of a, if he had played more last season, I venture to guess that he'd probably be a 4-star across the board if I had to guess. But we've talked about it. We saw under Perry Eliano all those times where Ohio State missed on the KJ Boldens or the Caleb Downs, obviously a few years back. And then they were just left with virtually nothing, or they had to go kind of way down the board. And with Matt Guerrieri, I think this is one of those kids that you couldn't let him stick with Wisconsin or go elsewhere. So I'm glad they're letting him in now. I'm glad he's made the decision. And like you said, there's other big names out there, and we've got 2 more spots available, whether that's Fahim Delane or Trey McNutt or whomever, but 2 out of the 4 already committed. That's a really nice start for the safety class.
I look at Cody Haddad, and I think it's the type of situation where I'm applauding the decision to go get him early, because in the last few years, we've seen Ohio State try to circle back around in September and October on these types of players that maybe are overlooked because of their regionality or because they don't have ideal prototypical size. Cody's about 6 foot, 175, but I don't care. He plays a lot bigger than that. And I think people should just be like, hey, this is they need 4 in this class. And he is a dynamic football player. And I'm telling you, cut the tape on and watch what happens to him this summer and this season as he gets into a senior year. His rankings are going to go through the roof. He is a really, really good football player, and people should be stoked about it. So that's kind of wrapping up the fireworks from the weekend. That's how they started with Nate Roberts and Cody Haddad giving Ohio State now 13 commitments. I think that pushed them to the number 1 class on 247 Sports. I don't think that they're still number 2 on Rivals behind Notre Dame, who has 18 commitments, and they're number 1 on 3 at this point. So they've been slowly moving up the charts and are now the number 1 ranked class in the country, according to 2 of the 3 major recruiting services. So that's good news, because there are a lot of other players who could potentially add to that as we start moving into the next couple of months. One of those players is DeCorian Moore, the 5-star wide receiver from Duncanville, Texas, committed to LSU, was supposed to visit this weekend, did not visit this weekend because a track meet that he had from originally was on Thursday, got rescheduled to Friday, and it changed everything on his schedule. What's most interesting about this to me, Andrew, is that originally the plan was that he was going to be at LSU this weekend for their spring game. And when he decided to visit Ohio State for their spring game instead, it caused a bit of a stir up in Baton Rouge. Like, hey, that doesn't make sense. Why are you going to see them and not us when you're committed to us? When the track meet got rescheduled, he could have then opted to go to LSU as he had originally planned, but instead decided to stay home and play in a 7-on-7 tournament, not going to LSU. Now, this is why recruiting is awesome, I suppose, or miserable, depending on who you ask. At that 7-on-7 tournament, DeCorian Moore is asked about his commitment and the strength of his pledge to LSU, to which he says he's 100% locked in. He's just doing his due diligence, and he's got, he's firmly committed to LSU, and now all is right in the world. Now, of course, that means we have to ignore the copious amounts of LSU message board posts who said, screw him, we'll move on from him. Let's go get Jamie French. F this guy. We don't need him anyway. But that's just fun. That's all fun. It's part of the world. But it's not over, because now DeCorian Moore is scheduled to visit Ohio State on April 27th with his mother. And in some ways, I almost think, and you can correct me if you think that I'm off base here, while it's awesome to see a spring practice with 80,000 people show up, while it's awesome to be around players like Devin Sanchez and Naeem Offord and Tavian St. Clair and Carter Lowe and TJ Alford and Jonah Williams and all these other dudes, there is probably something to be said for a weekend visit where it's DeCorian Moore, his mother, and the Ohio State coaches, and that's it. And maybe you don't get the same vibe for what campus life is like at that juncture, but the ability to have a true connection, to be able to show him and his mother, specifically his mother, what Ohio State is all about, and to really be able to give a comprehensive visit is probably more valuable. Do you think I'm crazy for that? Because I know that there's an allure to being there on a packed game day.
I do not think you're crazy for that. I think he is going to the Texas spring game next weekend. I could be wrong on that. And I'm sure there's going to be a million kids there. So to get him and his mom on campus in Columbus when there's not a ton going on, I do not think that's the worst thing in the world. I kind of like that strategy, to be completely honest. As for the comments of him being 100%, or I think I saw somewhere it said he was 1,000% committed to LSU.
That's impossible.
I know that's up there. I don't believe that. I will say I did read one of the updates coming out of the event today or whatever that said that I'm not sure if it was Chad Simmons or who it was that talked to him, came away from it thinking that Oregon was the biggest threat to LSU, which seems kind of, I don't know if that's accurate, but also that he came away saying that his spring visits were done. So just to confirm, you're under the impression Ohio State is expecting him in Columbus here in a few weeks still.
As of Saturday evening, 100% Ohio State expects him on campus on April 27th. Once the schedule came out and changed, immediately the family worked with Ohio State to reschedule and change their flights. So it was not like they canceled the flights, they changed them. So I don't know if that was just an oversight by Chad or whomever, but I can understand the allure or the idea that Oregon maybe pushing. Rashad Samples, the new running backs coach at Oregon, is a guy that is from Duncanville High School. Like, it's a very well-known recruiter. But I think the funny thing is, like, I don't know if the LSU folks even believe like they're the team to beat, or if he's 1,000% locked in. That's sort of irrelevant. What is obvious is that Oregon believes that they are the team to beat. Texas believes that they are the team to beat. And while I wouldn't say Ohio State believes they're the team to beat at this point, they certainly do not think that they are far off. And when you look at now the visit that DeCorian Moore made a month ago, couple that with the April 27th visit upcoming, and then back again another month later for the official visit, that's 3 visits in about 12 weeks. Like, that matters. And I don't think that they should be counted out at this point. So I would caution anybody who's ruling the Buckeyes out in that fight to maybe slow your roll.
Real quick. So we've talked about how getting his mom on campus is big. Neither of those previous 2 visits, she has not been on those ones. Those have all been with trainers or coaches or something. Is that accurate?
Well, he's only been to Ohio State once.
Or sorry, the one visit. Yeah.
That was with the trainer. Yeah. So
okay.
Now, what's interesting, I think it was Bill Kurelic from 247 who had a quote from his mother saying, I need to go see Ohio State with him because I need to see why he loves it so much. Like, the fact that the family is doing that relatively quickly, and again, as soon as something fell through, rescheduling it immediately, like, that to me feels like a genuine action and not a player. Again, he's not coming on a weekend where there's a big party atmosphere and there's 400 other recruits. Like, that to me feels like a business trip. So I guess we'll see how that works out. But that's the way recruiting is right now. There's things that are happening all over the place. This weekend, for example, starting Thursday, Elijah Bo Barnes from Skyline High School in Texas, Emmanuel Carmo in Minnesota, and Jaden Harmon down in Georgia. 3 of Ohio State's top 6 linebackers on the board, all committed elsewhere. Bo Barnes to Texas, Jaden Harmon to Alabama, and Carmo to Minnesota. And now, like, despite the fact that Ohio State's in a pretty good position at linebacker with Eli Lee and TJ Alford committed, James Laurinaitis, all three of those dudes were supposed to be taking official visits in a month and a half, and we're all at the top of the proverbial list. And now it resets, puts a lot of focus on Riley Pettijohn in Texas as probably the top guy on the remaining board. And if we're being honest, he was probably the top guy even with Carmo and Barnes and Harmon on it. But Pettijohn is now priority one and like priority done, really. I don't know that there's anybody else who's even in that conversation. So as you look at the linebacker board, like Madden Faremo from California, he visited on Friday, did not stay for the spring game, but it's still, pretty important trip, his second one. I still think Notre Dame is probably the team to beat there because I don't know that Ohio State is pushing as hard as they can there, because in discussions I've had with people, there's a belief that Faremo and Eli Lee are kind of the same type of player, and they're looking for another edge guy, a little longer, more twitchy outside guy. So that's where Riley Pettijohn is very important. And Andrew, if you haven't watched his tape, I sincerely recommend doing so. And we're going to get to a point on this show where we can show some clips and stuff, but it's hard to do because I'm just doing this by myself, and my hands don't want to grab over here, and then I'm afraid I'm going to mess something up, and I don't like screwing up stuff, but like maybe I just need to be more willing to experiment. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you should. I have not watched his tape just because honestly, I just long assumed he was going to Texas. Maybe with Elijah Barnes committing, I don't know what their numbers game is like. Maybe that can help Ohio State in their pursuit there. I really don't know what they're going to do with the linebacker. Obviously, they've got two committed already, so it's not like they're in, the danger zone here or anything. We talked about Elijah Melendez last week, the Miami commit, who's recently visited Michigan, I believe, but he's expected back in Columbus. I don't know. And I don't think we're factoring Justin Hill into this just because we're viewing him as more of like kind of a hybrid edge rusher type, I guess. But I don't know. Maybe there's another Ohio kid out there or something, or maybe they can swing for the fences and get one of these national guys. I'm not sure what's going to happen there.
No, I think that's where a player like Canton McKinley's Dante McClellan becomes an interesting guy to watch if he's willing to be patient enough and come back in camp. Dante is that like longer outside guy, but he's kind of raw, is not physically quite on the level that someone like Pettijohn is. But I've seen Dante McClellan in like 7-on-7 type situations, and he might be the best cover linebacker I've ever seen in like out of a recruit. Like that dude covers like a cornerback, and he's exceptional at it. I'd like to see him be a little bit more physical, but I know Jim Knowles has a very good relationship with him, and there is an opportunity, I think, because of all this chaos that happened over the last few days at linebacker, now for Dante McClellan to maybe be having a moving up that board, because they definitely need a third linebacker in this class. So that's something to watch. A lot of moving parts. We'll see if the linebacker board just expands for James Laurinaitis from here, or if he really dials in and focuses on Pettijohn with Faremo as maybe the backup plan. But I don't want to say backup plan, but he's not a plan B guy, but I think he's more of a priority for Notre Dame at this point. But I do like Dante McClellan quite a bit, so I think people should look for him. So I am always hearing about the offensive line struggles in recruiting, and like I kind of understand it because it's obvious that Ohio State in the last couple of years has swung and missed at like their top tackle targets from around the country. Even you don't have to look back, too far, like Brandon Baker, Jordan Seaton, et cetera. I mean, we can go every year and find 2 or 3 guys that you're like, well, we're going to get him. And then they don't get him. And they're like, man, we didn't get him. We stink. And like, that's not the case. It's not like Justin Fry's not trying, people. It's hard to recruit these guys. There's not that many of them around the country. And that's why I think it's interesting on a weekend like this. Like there's so much conversation heading into the spring game about who's visiting, who's not visiting, who's going where, that a 5-star like Douglas Utu out in Las Vegas, Bishop Gorman High School, can just sneak into Columbus without anybody knowing, or Javen McFadden, the 4-star interior lineman from the Washington, D.C. area who Ohio State loves and has loved for a while. And like, there's a real good connection there, but he doesn't talk. So nobody talks about him. And like, he shows up and you're like, oh, you see him at the spring game, just yucking it up with Carter Lowe. Like they're best friends. Like they've known each other forever. Like there's a lot of pieces on the recruiting trail that are happening, that are moving around that we're not always seeing, because if the kids are not attention seekers, if the kids are not putting out like, hey, I'm visiting here this weekend, some of those kids are just flying under the radar. And I think people should understand, in what is likely to be a 3 or 4 at the absolute max class for offensive linemen, Justin Fry and Ohio State are swinging for the fences in this cycle. They are looking at Carter Lowe, who's obviously a 5-star prospect according to a couple different agencies and a top 35 player across the board. Avery Gatch from Michigan, David Sanders, Douglas Utu, Javen McFadden. Like there are backup plans and there are plan B guys, but they're swinging for the fences. And so after the last couple of years, Andrew, I think it is a little bit like, ooh, are we sure we want to do this? But like, you're Ohio State, right? Why would you not make that attempt?
Yeah, like in a way, I kind of feel bad for Justin Fry because, you know, he's obviously got Carter Lowe this go around. And then for 2026, he's probably going to get Maxwell Riley. And people aren't going to give him a whole lot of credit because these guys are all from Ohio. But I think we've talked recently about how there's just not a lot of names out there on the offensive line board right now. So it was good to see those two in town this weekend.
Utu's the number 2 ranked offensive tackle in the country, behind David Sanders. So like it's a pretty big deal when he shows up, and he's now visited twice with his family. Like there's a real interest.
Yeah. I mean, just having them on campus is a good sign. I haven't followed the Utu recruitment much at all. Is there like a pecking order for him, or is it just way early in the process? I'm totally in the dark on that one.
I mean, there's a lot of discussion about Oklahoma. There's a lot of discussion always with those kids about Alabama. There's USC, the poly kids, like, are always comfortable out west, but Michigan is very involved. He visited Ann Arbor last weekend. Like it's the usual suspects. I mean, it is, you're going to compete against the same 5 or 6 schools every single year for those major offensive linemen.
Yeah. And then that McFadden kid, I know a little bit about him, but just not a name we've talked about a lot lately because, as you mentioned, sometimes these offensive linemen, they just fly under the radar. For every Jordan Seaton, there's like 10 other guys that just never say anything. I know he's McFadden, more of an interior guy, but still, just getting those guys on campus is big because it's at least got them firmly on the watch list, I guess. And prior to this weekend, there were really only a handful of names I was even paying attention to.
Yeah, and there are other names. I mean, there's players around the country. There's a young man, Joshua Blackston, I think is his name, in Maryland or Virginia. Let me find out. I feel bad. I messed up that Joshua. He's in he's in Maryland, Baltimore. Like Ohio State's really high on him. Like there are players that are out there that we just don't talk as much about because the general way of living for the offensive lineman is like understated and very cerebral and very private. They don't like to get out and do a lot of attention seeking. And in general, the kids that are the attention seekers on the offensive line are not the type of kids that Ohio State's going to end up landing. So we spend a lot of time focusing on them, and then it's just a waste of our time and energy. I think that what you have with this small group, though, is Carter Lowe putting in a ton of work. He's been on campus the last 3 weeks. He was there for David Sanders, came back for Avery Gatch, came back this weekend to spend it with Utu. Like he is doing a ton of work alongside of Justin Fry and Mike Soleni. And like Ohio State is not going to be afraid to pivot off of these guys when they feel like it's time or when they feel like they have to. But until the official visit season is here and you can actually get a true sense of where things stand for these kids, because there's a lot of conversations that you just don't get to have on these unofficial visits about academics, about NIL, about like you don't get to have all these until you have these kids in town with their both parents for official visits. So a lot of these moving parts are going to get sorted out as we head into the official visit season for Ohio State. But like, just don't think that Justin Fry is not trying. And that's where I think I get pissed off, because it's like, that's very weird for people to just naturally assume or leap to the conclusion that an Ohio State assistant making over $1 million a year is not even trying. He's just, why does he suck at this? Does he even care? Like, yes, he cares. Like, why does that even need to be said?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know we're talking more national here, but just back to the local scene real quick. We haven't talked about was it Nolan Davenport? Is that the Ohio kid?
No, yeah, from Massillon. Yeah.
No, yeah, we haven't talked about him in a few weeks. I think we kind of thought he was going to get offered there a while ago. It didn't happen. As we sit here now in mid-April, do you think you would still have him penciled into like your mock class when all things are done, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's going to be entirely up to him if he's willing to be patient and come in camp in June. I think that's the conversation Ohio State's had with him. And I think that the very reason that conversation is happening is because of what I just said. They're swinging for the fences. Like, there has been a fundamental shift in the way that Ohio State views itself on the recruiting trail. And I think that that's something we'll talk about next. But this is a team that for years has been kind of okay not being the bully. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, we do things this way. We do, like, they are leaning into this concept of like, actually, we're Ohio State. We are bigger than anybody in the country. And we have as good an NIL as anybody in the country. And the program has more history than anybody in the country. And why are we being afraid to throw our weight around? Why are we being afraid to get in the ring and swing for these kids? Now, that does mean that you might miss on some of them, because that's the way it is in heavyweight fights. Sometimes you lose. But like, if you are going to build a program in this new era of college football, you cannot build it on Nolan Davenport's. Like, that supplements it. That is what you need to maintain it. But if you are able to go out and compete for one of the top 2 or 3 offensive linemen in the country, and David Sanders is a prime example of this. Like, he visited Ohio State a year ago, okay, for the spring football game. Nobody ever talked about Ohio State ever again for him. And I don't know why. It's not like Justin Fry wasn't involved. We've talked about it here before. Like, sometimes these kids talk about who they're asked about, and they're not seeking attention and they're not seeking conversation. But here we are now. Ohio State becomes the only non-Southern team to make his top 6. He makes his second visit 2 weeks ago. Great visit. I've heard some rumblings that he might be back in Columbus in May before an official visit, just to continue building. Like, if that happens, we may not even know it, because he's not going to announce it. And it's not going to be at a time when there's going to be a lot of other fanfare or big events or anything like that. So it could happen on a Tuesday afternoon, and we may never know. And if that, that's the stuff that's just percolating underneath the surface. And like, those are all important. You're Ohio State. You don't have to look to plan Bs yet. And Nolan Davenport is going to be a really good offensive lineman. But if Ohio State recruited only 3-star developmental offensive linemen, people would be pissed, right? Like, it's this weird catch-22. So like, how do you decide how to balance that? And I think that the way you should do it is, at this time of the year, you swing for the fences if you're Ohio State, and that's what they're doing. So we'll see if it pays off. But I think that there's been a lot of discussion in the last 6 weeks about, was Justin Fry even doing anything? Are they even bringing in visitors? Like, they've had all the top offensive linemen in the country in to visit. I mean, that they're recruiting. There are some guys I think you can look across the board and be like, why aren't they recruiting Josh Petty or Andrew Babola or like one of these guys? They're just not. So, they obviously pick their guys for a reason.
I think people see Jamie French and Vernell Brown visit Ohio State, and coming out of that visit, you've got all this chatter about Ohio State is now the team to beat. That doesn't happen so much when some of these offensive linemen visit. And I know it's comparing Brian Hartline to any other recruiter in the country is just unfair to the other person. But I think that's kind of got people jaded a bit when it comes to just reality. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, I think most of that, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, is a byproduct of the difference in approach by wide receivers and cornerbacks versus an offensive lineman. Like, again, offensive linemen are introspective. They are generally quiet. They are generally the brains of the football team. They're the guys that are very focused on process and making sure that, they're not attention whores. I mean, to put it politely, where wide receivers and defensive backs, and these are the positions where there's a lot of that. I don't want to say diva mentality, because I'm not suggesting any of those guys are divas, but They're in public eye every weekend at 7-on-7 events. They get a ton of interviews because they're at 7-on-7s. They're traveling all over the country, and like the offensive linemen are not. So unless you're in person at their high school or seeing them at one of the Under Armour camps or a rivals camp, you don't see those kids. And so the discussion around them is a lot more nuanced and a lot more like, well, there's this group of schools we know about, but what he's actually thinking in that group is almost impossible to know. Like if you look at David Sanders, he made 2 visits in the last 2 weeks to Tennessee. Do we now suppose that Tennessee is the leader? I don't know. Tennessee's telling him that they're going to teach him how to play a pro style offensive line. Like that's not what they do. Like, so we're just getting scraps of information most of the time when it comes to offensive linemen. And there's a deluge of information and conversation and appearances for the other positions because of 7-on-7. So that's how I view it anyway. But I did. So Ohio State this weekend had Jakeem Stewart, the number 1 ranked player in the country in the class of 2026, St. Augustine High School in New Orleans. Just a bad dude. Like one of those guys that you're like, that's how you build a team. And I wanted to talk about him, Bryce Perry Wright and Deuce Geralds, who are 3 of the top 5 overall defensive linemen in the class. Bryce Perry Wright is from Buford High School, so same as Edric Houston. And Deuce Geralds is now at IMG, but he's originally from Georgia. Like those are 3 dudes Ohio State is very involved with already, very interested in already. And obviously Ohio State does well in Georgia, and that's not anything new. I want to talk about Jakeem Stewart because I think the fact that he's already now visited, he has told multiple people that the visit was the best visit he's been on. It was a situation where Ohio State was just trying to see like, hey, is this real? Can we get really involved here? Alan Clark, Larry Johnson's assistant, is from Louisiana, has done a great job opening the door there. Sam Petito, Ohio State's new director of player personnel, is from Louisiana. Like there are now connections to that state that have not been present before. And I think Ohio State, because they have been, as I said, like afraid to be the bully, I don't think they've tried hard enough to get players out of Louisiana. Like, and there's this common misconception, Andrew, and like, oh, Louisiana players don't leave the state. Like Ed Reed from Louisiana, he had no problem leaving the state. Devontae Smith from Louisiana, he didn't have any problem leaving the state. Like you can go back over the last 10 years, and I bet you're going to find 10 to 15 NFL players right now from Louisiana that had no problem leaving the state, whether it was Alabama or Georgia or Miami or wherever. There's an opportunity there if you're willing to try. And in the new era of college football, and I hate saying that over and over, but it's imperative that we do because it's real. No one swings a bigger stick than Ohio State. It's like, so at some point, Larry Johnson, who's obviously regarded as the best defensive line coach of all time, or if not the best, one of the best, like, why would you not go in there and swing as hard as you can at these kids?
Yeah, it's a valid question. Today I saw some articles about, as you mentioned, Stewart saying the visit to Ohio State was his best visit. I've seen a couple people even suggesting Ohio State might be the leader right now. And I immediately just kind of brushed it to the side. 5-star Louisiana kid. It's not something that typically happens for Ohio State.
Yeah.
But as you said, they've got things together now on the NIL front. They do have some ties to Louisiana now, which I completely forgot about. So that gives me, I guess, a glimmer of hope. I've also seen some rumors about him reclassifying to 2025. I don't know if you've heard that or if there's any truth to that at all.
I don't know, but I mean, those rumors generally don't happen for no reason.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, getting him on campus is huge. And if he's going to move his timeline up and he does reclassify, can you get him back in June for an official or this fall for an official or whatever? But yeah, nice to have him on campus. That's a big deal in itself.
Well, you might be able to get him back twice. He said he's coming back in June for a camp. Now, whether or not that turns out to be a camp or an official visit, you can get him. He can come back in June for a camp and then decide he's reclassifying and then take an official visit in the fall. So like there's a lot of ways that this can go. Alabama's obviously going to be involved. Georgia's going to be involved. LSU's going to be involved. Everyone's involved. He's the best player in the country. But again, this is a situation where 3 years ago, I don't think Ohio State would even be like getting into the batter's box. And I know that at times, like we've said over and over in the last couple of years, like, well, this is a problem. Ohio State can't win this one because of NIL. But guess what? That's not true anymore. So they can win it partly because of NIL. That has opened a highway to places heretofore unknown. That is why teams around the country like USC and Texas A&M are feeling like they can come into Ohio and try to steal Trey McNutt from the Buckeyes. Like, turnabout is fair play. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Pick a freaking, thing. Pick a motto. Like, you can do this now. And when you have Larry Johnson, you have Alan Clark, you have Brandon Jordan, you have Sam Petito, somebody who's from Amite, Louisiana, like 30 minutes away from Baton Rouge. Like, there is something here that I'm not going to suggest. I know, like, there's times when I say, oh, don't sleep on Ohio State for this kid. Don't sleep on Ohio State for this kid. Like, it's going to be an interesting conversation moving forward. So we'll see if he comes back in June for the unofficial on the camp circuit, like he said he's going to. If he does, watch out. I'll just put it that way. Let's go to the 4-minute offense. And what's on your mind?
Just a couple quick things, I guess. So Damian Shanklin, one of the top remaining defensive end targets, was in Baton Rouge this weekend. And I guess he now has a timeline, and I know it's kind of pointless to talk about it too much when he's announcing on September 21st, but any immediate thoughts on that? Again, there's a lot to play out over the next several months, but just throwing it out there at you.
Is that his birthday or something?
I don't know. It's probably has some meaningful, like, dog's birthday or adoption day. I don't know. It's got to be something.
So I suppose it matters which old cliche of recruiting you want to listen to. Number one, recruits generally don't pick a decision date unless they have a decision made. So but at the same time, it's 6 months from now. Everything can change. So the Buckeyes are in good shape. There is going to, when you're looking at defensive ends, when you're looking at 6'5", 240-pound defensive ends, there are a lot of schools who want them, and there's a lot of things people will do to get them. Ohio State, from what I was told this week, may only be looking to add one more defensive end, assuming that Zahir Mathis and London Merritt stay at that spot. So it could be a situation where it was between Damian Shanklin and Dye, Marion Dye, the other kid from Indiana. So I think there's also a world where the Buckeyes could massage that enough to bring them both in still, but it's interesting. I know that Damian has an official visit for Ohio State scheduled, like first week of June. So he's going to be there in one of their important weekends where they're going to have a lot of commits and a lot of their top targets. So he's a real guy for sure.
Got it. We've talked a lot about running backs over the last few weeks. Things seem to be looking good for Jordan Davison, Bo Jackson. Everybody's panicking about Marquise Davis. He did not make it to town this week. We thought maybe there was a chance he makes 2 visits, and he wasn't there. He was not there this weekend, correct? Just to confirm.
Correct.
Okay. And then you had thrown out some names the other week that Carlos Lachlan liked, and he did offer them shortly after you brought those names to the podcast. Another offer went out yesterday or this weekend. A kid with some ties to Lachlan, and you can talk about those. But Anthony Rogers, Alabama commit from Alabama at IMG now. I have not watched his tape yet. His nickname is Turbo, so I assume that means he's got some juice. But just another name to watch, I guess, for the 2025 running back class.
Yeah, I mean, he's 5'8". He's small. And if you're 5'8" and you have an offer from Ohio State and you're committed to Alabama, that means generally one thing, and it means you're super freaking fast. He's a 10-4 guy in the 100. He is small, but he's short, but he's not small, if that makes sense. Like he's 5'8" and almost 200 pounds. Like he is a well put together young person. The relationship, obviously, he's from Montgomery, Alabama. That's where Carlos Lachlan's from. So there is a real relationship there. I was told, and I'm not entirely sure how it links up. I'd have to go through. I don't know exactly where Quinshon Judkins started his high school career. I was told those two actually played on the same team when they were younger. So there's at least a connection there. And I was also told that Carlos Lachlan, and I don't even know what school Lachlan was at that point. It might have been Western Kentucky. It might have been working as a assistant at Memphis. It might have been like that he was the first person to offer Anthony Rogers. So there's at least something to pay attention there. Bottom line, the question is, does it affect Jordan Davison? Does it affect Bo Jackson? Does it affect any? I don't think it affects anyone else. I think, especially with the departure of Dallin Hayden that's coming up, there is a real need now for Ohio State to try to sign 3 running backs in this class. And I think there's actually even an argument to be made that, knowing that Quinshawn Judkins and Trayvon Henderson are out of the program after this year, that you may need to sign 3 prep running backs and still bring in a transfer, because you're only going to have Sam Williams-Dixon and James Peoples on the roster. So as far as scholarship backs. So I think that it's really just understanding this is opening up in a way that you need more players. And it's not a surprise that for Lachlan, he's going to go to the well of people that he knows well to really try to bolster that, because he's already got these existing relationships. Now, what does it mean for the relationship with guys like Marquise Davis? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to write it off, but to me, it kind of feels like there's a window where Marquise Davis and Carlos Lachlan can build a relationship. And it was like a small window to start with, and it's probably gotten a lot smaller. But again, as we talked about a lot last week, like, can you really be mad about it if Ohio State is in the driver's seat for Jordan Davison, and in the driver's seat for Bo Jackson, and in the driver's seat for De'Aaron Hill, or any of the other guys that have been offered lately? Like, you can't sign everyone. Everyone, understandably, would love for Jordan Davison and Marquise Davis and Bo Jackson to be in the class at Ohio State, but like, a guy like Anthony Rogers is different because he's a totally different type of running back. Like, Bo Jackson and Marquise Davis are kind of the same type of running back. Maybe Marquise is probably more explosive, but like, you can only do what you can do. So they're trying to get a relationship. It may not even be Marquise who's not open to it. Maybe it's his parents. Maybe it's his coach who says, hey, we don't want to start over. Like, I don't know all of the details, but I do know that they're trying, and you can't stand pat and not offer other players under the assumption that Jordan Davison is coming, or the assumption that Bo Jackson's coming. Like, you get burned majorly if you do that.
Yeah, and not going to play in or out today, but just real quick, as we sit here today, again, mid-April, would you say the most likely outcome for the running back class is Jordan Davison, Bo Jackson, and then maybe one of these other names for that third spot? Is that kind of the best guess right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. I think Ohio State's the leader in the clubhouse for Jordan Davison and Bo Jackson. But of course, there is always an opportunity for other teams to find a way to play another round, and we'll see how that goes. But I think ideal world for the Buckeyes, you would end up heading into the summer feeling like Bo and Mark and Jordan are in the boat, and then you can really evaluate the other guys, the Mills Knight, the De'Aaron Hill, the Anthony Rogers, all these other players that Carlos Lachlan has seen, and then maybe you can get those kids on campus this summer, and then official visit in the fall and try to add one more. That's how I would see it. But
yeah, that makes sense. And just last thing here real quick, kind of give us an idea, like, what is the recruiting calendar going to be like coming off of the spring game? We know DeCorian Moore is expected in Columbus here in 2 weeks, but is it kind of like a lull between now and late May? We keep a tentative list of visitors on the forum, and I think the next big visit weekend, I think, is May 31st. But just what's the next handful of weeks going to be like?
Yeah, we head into a dead period right now, which there is, but there's also the contact period, so it's kind of weird. Yeah. The quiet period, which is when players are allowed to visit the school, but the school is not allowed to visit players, right? That ends today, or Sunday night. It ends. And then the contact period opens on April 15th through May 25th, which means that contact period is at the period of time when it is permissible for authorized athletic department staff members to make in-person off-campus recruiting contacts and evaluations. Okay. So that means the staff can go out on the road and see kids at their schools, but the kids cannot, the kids can still come to campus, but they can also go out and see them. May 26th through the 29th is another dead period, where a dead period is the period of time when it is not permissible to make in-person recruiting contacts or evaluations on or off the member institution's campus. So there's like a 3-day completely dead period. Then there's a month of another quiet period, which is camps, which is on campus evaluations. And then June 24th, so the Buckeyes' last big weekend for official visits will be the 21st and 22nd of June. And then there's a month of a dead period where nothing can happen. So we are entering the part of the calendar where Ohio State is going to be on the road. As we heard Chip Kelly say post-game on Saturday, none of the coaches are going on the road this week for Ohio State because they want to use this week to do one-on-ones and evaluations with their own roster. So with the transfer portal opening on Tuesday, the Buckeyes are going to wait until another week goes by to see where they need to go on the recruiting trail. So obviously players can still visit, but again, they can't work out. They can't do any of that sort of stuff until June. So lots going on. It's very convoluted, and I don't really know why they make it so complicated, but
yeah, it's confusing, but that's all I really got.
All right. Well, that's all we really got. This has been Talking Stuff. That's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Thank you for watching. Please rate, review, subscribe. Leave us a comment. Let us know if we suck. Let us know if you enjoyed the show. Actually, just let us know if you enjoyed the show. If you think we suck, I don't need that, to be honest. Life is hard enough. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.